Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching the Africa Brief on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. The United Nations calls for an immediate ceasefire in El Fasher, warning that civilians are cut off from food, healthcare and safe escape routes as fighting intensifies. Aid agencies say targeted attacks on hospitals and humanitarian workers are deepening the crisis. Darfur's governor, Mini Mwawi, demands protection for civilians in Al Fasher as the RSF claims to have seized the city. He calls for the fate of the displaced to be revealed for an independent investigation into the alleged massacres. 4 people are dead after security forces clashed with supporters of an opposition leader who claims victory in Cameroonians' presidential election. Tensions are rising ahead of official results, with protesters demanding their candidate be recognised as the winner. As President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio depart the ASEAN summit for Japan, China's top envoys join leaders from Brazil, Canada, the EU and ASEAN to advance new economic partnerships and trade agreements. US President Donald Trump says he expects the United States and China to come away with a deal as he prepares to meet President Xi Jinping in South Korea this week. Speaking aboard Air Force One, Trump says he has a lot of respect for President Xi as he continues his Asia tour. US President Donald Trump leaves Malaysia for the second leg of his Asia tour, with Air Force One departing Kuala Lumpur for Tokyo. He will meet Japan's new Prime Minister, Shinai Takaichi, on Tuesday. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva says US President Donald Trump has assured him a trade agreement can be reached to ease punitive tariffs. Lula spoke after meeting Trump on the sidelines of a Southeast Asian summit. Venezuela accuses Trinidad and Tobago of staging a military provocation with the CIA during joint exercises in the Caribbean, claiming mercenaries were caught planning a false flag attack to trigger a full confrontation with Caracas. The United Nations' Emergency Relief Coordinator, Tom Fletcher, has called for an immediate ceasefire in Al Fasher, the capital of Sudan's North Darfur region. This amid reports of significant civilian deaths, attacks on hospitals and the city's reported capture by the Rapid Support Forces. Fletcher has said that he is deeply alarmed by reports of civilian casualties and forced displacement as fierce fighting engulfs the city. This comes as RSF had earlier said that they had captured the army headquarters in the city of Al Fasher, which was the Sudanese army's last stronghold in the Darfur region. The RSF has besieged the city for the past 18 months as it fights the army and allied former rebels and local fighters. It has targeted civilians in frequent drone and artillery strikes, while the siege has spread starvation among the city where 250,000 people remain. Now, to discuss this is Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev, a former Indian ambassador, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us, Ambassador, on this broadcast. Can you tell us a little bit about the significance of the alleged capture of El Fasher by the RSF, and of course the humanitarian toll that it will cause the civilian population?
Thank you for having me. It's an important development in a largely forgotten civil war in Sudan, which has been waging for 2.5 years. Attempts to pacify the country, which has been divided by RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, and uh, Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, uh, have not gained traction. And the much of the fighting has been focused during the past few weeks on El Fasher, the capital of northern Darfur region, which is actually the westernmost area of Sudan. Sudan is a large country, two-thirds of India's area, uh, and it has over 50 million population, almost equally divided between Muslims and Arabs in the north and African origin non-Muslims in the west and south. Uh, Now, the focus of this fighting has been El Fasher, which is the last redoubt of SAF in the Darfur region, in the east, in the west. Uh, this is important because earlier this year, after 2 years of fighting, RSF declared its intention to create its own government. That means the area of the Darfur region and southern area called Kordofan are where it has strength. It would like to have its own government, effectively partitioning Sudan into two countries. Now, Darfur was the only place where it did not have its writ run. SAF was still in charge and in strength. So it became a focal point of RSF's action to have somehow SAF kicked out of that city so that it can then have a consolidated area, geographical area in the west and the south of the country, and perhaps then consolidate itself with its tribal cohorts and militias and relaunch itself uh, as a force in the Khartoum region where SAF has finally been able to recoup its writ. Now here I should say that having this region, Darfur and Kordofan, consigned to itself helps RSF in gaining an identity. And secondly, it is contiguous now with a number of African countries from Libya to Chad and to the South Sudan, etc., through which it can have military support as well as supplies of food and other equipment. It has its backers, which believe that Khartoum-based government is more Islamist in its approach to the situation, and RSF is less of a threat of militant Islam. UAE, for example, is believed to be backing RSF through Chad, through Libya, and so is the Libyan faction in the east of Libya, which is contiguous to Darfur, also trying to help this RSF through the corridor, land corridor. Erstwhile Wagner group of Russian mercenaries are also known to be active on the side of RSF. So there is an internationalization of this conflict through the Darfur and through El Fasher. Now here I would like to spend a couple of sentences in giving you the background. Darfur and Kordofan region have large minorities of Africans. And RSF was created 2 decades ago by the then President al-Bashir to curb these Africans. And it has plenty of support from the Arab and Muslim tribes called Janjaweed that has launched a number of programs to expel Africans from the Darfur region. So Al-Fashir's fall, as is being reported, to RSF would put these people who have taken refuge in that city at risk of further expulsion, etc. So that is where United Nations appeal comes into focus. Thank you.
Yes, and just very, very briefly, Ambassador, how can the United Nations help here? It's often comes under criticism for not being able to, for not being a peacekeeping body anymore. However, in conflicts like Africa, in continents like Africa, can it make a difference here?
It's a good question, and it's difficult to be optimistic. Neither the United Nations nor international community at large have succeeded in getting the groups together. Various attempts by United Nations, last one being in Geneva earlier this year, have failed. And ceasefires called by regional bodies, United States and others, have also not gone beyond some symbolic tenure during Eid or during other Islamic holidays, etc. Both sides are fighting to take it all, and there have been plenty brutal and bitter fighting among the two. I think it's perhaps the International Criminal Court, which has tried a number of African despots and human rights violators in that area, is the right body to issue its writ. But then who's going to arrest people when the fighting is waging on? I think current focus is to somehow get humanitarian assistance to the beleaguered people in the various pockets of Sudan.
Yes, Ambassador Sachdev, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to get such an insightful answer from you there. We stay, of course, in the African continent, where at least 4 people have been killed during protests in Cameroon's economic capital of Douala, ahead of the official announcement of the results in a highly contested presidential election. Hundreds of supporters of opposition presidential candidate Issei Chesoma Bakare defied a ban to hold protesters in several cities and clashed with security forces. Meanwhile, citizens are turning to social media to voice concerns amid protests and rising tensions over alleged vote rigging in favour of President Paul Biya. Let's in fact listen in to some of the citizens.
We are tired of the situation and everybody is frustrated. Like, I think every Cameroonian experiences what we're going through one way or another. Now social media is more popular than it used to be. I mean, it's growing year by year. So we are beginning to find our voice, getting that courage, knowing that, okay, it's left on us to do something about it because it's our country and politics affects everybody, whether you're a doctor, a plumber, a bike rider, or an entrepreneur like myself, a farmer, whatever you do, our lives are basically decided by politics. So if we don't hold our leaders accountable, then we are basically leaving talks to decide our futures, and that's very dangerous.
A lot of us who have come up to speak, people fear for our lives, people fear for our safety, because that is the country we find ourselves in. We find ourselves in a country that is dictatorship instead of democracy. But we don't know what will happen. And we have still decided that despite whatever will happen, we will not keep quiet. We will still speak up. It is time for our voices to be heard as youths, the future of this country. It is time for us to speak up. We cannot keep living in fear.
We're now joined by Osanyin Taiwo, a policy and strategic implementation expert, and they join us from Obaja in Nigeria. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on the programme. Osanyin, what does this violence in Duyala tell us about the state's capacity to manage political dissent through democratic mechanisms rather than force?
Thank you for having me, Thomas. It's a pleasure always being on NewsX. Well, let me start by saying that it is high time for African leaders to take very necessary and important steps, understanding that leadership is not forced, but earned, firstly. Secondly, it is also necessary that African leaders must understand that when it is time to call it off, they should call it off. Paul Biya has been the president of Cameroon for the past 43 years, 91 years of age, and did not come out personally to campaign during this last election. His photographs and statues were used as political campaign tools because of his inability to come out to contest the election. And then there are results proposed to be announced today, and tensions are already arising. It is very important that African leaders and people like Paul Biya must take very cognizant steps and follow steps like the likes of the former president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, who once said that no life should be lost because any politician wants to become a president. And it's unfortunate that right now we have about 4 people dead due to protesters and counter-protest going on by policemen shooting at protesters towards this forthcoming announcement. And this is very sad because on the flip side, people are saying that they are tired of the 91-year-old president. On the other side, Berkeley is announcing himself as the president of the country, even when the election result is yet to be announced. These two situations create nothing less than a tense situation in the Cameroonian region and even the sub-Saharan. It's very definite that we must be, because this may eventually swing to the military taking over at the long run. And this is not actually good for a democratic consolidation that sub-Saharan Africa is suffering currently today, most especially in the West African region. And the Cameroonians must take very necessary steps to ensure adequately that this does not boomerang beyond what it is at the moment. And this is actually a step for the electoral body in Cameroon system should ensure that the winner of the election is properly announced without any form of favoritism or any form of bias or rigging, to avoid any other sense of tense situation that may happen or that has really occurred and escalate beyond what it is right now. Because if that does happen, we might be raging from a democratic system in Cameroon to a military dictatorship system.
Yes, and Cameroon, Osanyin, has had the same leader for over 40 years, as you've mentioned. From a governance perspective, how does such entrenched rule distort institutions meant to deliver credible elections? And of course, Africa is a continent with many old leaders. Of course, you've got Museveni in Uganda, who's been in power since 1986. You've got Ouattara, of course, who's leading Côte d'Ivoire, and you've got Equatorial Guinea's leader, who's been in power since 1979. What can you say about this pattern?
This is a very insignificant system of leadership. If you look at these countries you've mentioned, from Cameroon to Côte d'Ivoire, Uganda, and the likes that have had their presidents in position for over 3 decades, you realize that, one, there is no sort of development in these countries. Number two, they do not command any international framework in terms of development, in terms of either from economy to security and what have you. So what we see is simple than to say that we have personnels or we have persons that are only hungry for being in the position of leadership as being president of the country without even any sense of governance. And this has been the situation of Cameroon, Uganda, and the likes. Look at what is happening in Uganda currently. Spirit is actually coming in to tell us that the Gen Z is actually wanting back. What a clownish statement. Because I don't want to believe that the Gen Z even know it or the real source of it. And it's so clownish in the sense that it transfers to the end range of all other African regions that you have actually mentioned. And unfortunately, this is what creates a system that frustrates the African region, frustrates the African states, frustrates these countries to now say that, okay, if they cannot remove their leaders from a democratic system, they're going to a chaotic system. And then what happens eventually is the submergence of the military. And if care is not taken, we may eventually have some reoccurrence of military government taking over into these countries as soon as possible. And this is a very dangerous pattern because it has been seen in the past how many days in different countries, from Mozambique to Burkina Faso, and what have you, even to Mali. And right now, we're having a critical situation now in Cameroon. And this is going to be very critical because if African leaders do not take very drastic steps to understand that the people matter first as a pivotal tool for proper governance and for good leadership, they may eventually continue to rule the people rather than lead the people.
Sanyin, we have to carry on. Do stay with us. We have further updates from Africa, where the ruling junta in Mali is suspending classes at schools and universities for 2 weeks, citing fuel supply disruptions caused by a blockade organised by jihadists. Since September, the al-Qaeda-affiliated Janim has imposed a blockade on fuel imported from neighbouring countries, severely disrupting the landlocked nation and worsening an already precarious situation for millions of people. National Education Minister Amadou Skay Savane has announced the suspension of school classes for 2 weeks owing to the fuel shortage in the country. Let's take a listen in.
Cours seront suspendus sur toute l'étendue du territoire national du lundi 27 octobre 2025 au dimanche 9 novembre 2025. Les cours reprendront le 10 novembre 2025.
Well, once again joined by Osanyin. How did these jihadist forces become powerful enough to cut off a country like Mali's fuel supply?
Well, it's not far from the fact that when terrorist groups become a negotiation tool for government, they become very more empowered to do certain things like this. And this is the kind of system we have right now in Mali, where the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, linked Al-Qaeda, has been alleged to be in furtherance to this this blockade of fuel. And this is not far from the fact that Africa is on a keg of gunpowder, because when terrorist groups from Mali to Chad, from Chad to Niger, Niger to Nigeria, Nigeria to Cameroon, and this environment in the sub-Saharan region, there's a problem. And this problem may eventually resurface from a terrorist group taken over from government. And because if a terrorist group can single-handedly stop the importation of fuel in a country that has sovereignty, then it is very alarming. And this has created a situation where students will not be able to go to school. Now, it starts from the educational sector, where students have been deprived from learning in school. And this is going to take 2 weeks period. The question will be, for how long will this blockade of importations take place? Is it going to be 2 weeks? Then that means that something is on the line. For the government to understudy that it's going to take 2 weeks for then probably there's some negotiations going on. Why negotiate rather than tackle it once and for all and go headlong and destroy any form of terrorism in the African region, most especially in Mali? These are critical questions that we must ask ourselves and must ask African leaders, most especially in the sub-Saharan region, where terrorism has become a navigator tool for economic privacy. And this is what is currently happening in Mali today. If education is being stopped, suddenly and very soon, we would have other sectors of the government being stopped as well. We might have maybe the economy, and certainly maybe security, and certainly at some point in time, maybe the health sector.
Osanyin, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to get your insight on those matters. We have some breaking news, however, coming in now, and we head over to Asia for it. And US President Donald Trump has landed in Tokyo as part of the second leg of his trip across the continent. Trump is set to meet Japanese Emperor Naruhito on Monday at the Imperial Palace in the Japanese capital, 6 years after their previous meeting during the first Trump presidency. Trump is also set to hold talks with Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanai Takachi, during his trip. We will, of course, bring you all updates in regards to that. Now back to Africa, where Tanzania heads to the polls this week, with President Samia Suluhu Hassan widely expected to extend her rule. Her party, Chama cha Mapinduzi, has held power for 64 years, dominating the nation's politics since independence in 1961. Critics say the vote is taking place under a climate of fear, with opposition leaders, activists and journalists facing arrests and intimidation. Two major opposition figures, Tundu Lissu and Luthaga Mpina, have been barred from running, with Lissu jailed on treason charges he calls political. Analysts warn the election could tighten authoritarian control as voter apathy and fears of unrest grow. President Hassan urges calm and promises stability, but many Tanzanians say democracy itself is on the ballot. Now we move on once again, and the top producer of cocoa in the world, the Ivory Coast, is in the process of counting the votes as incumbent. President Nsande Otoro is being tipped as the favourite to win a fourth term in office. This follows what voters and observers are calling the undemocratic disqualification of senior opposition candidates, and has led to a fractured opposition in the Ivory Coast. All of this is expected to aid 83-year-old Otoro, who is widely expected to remain in the presidential office for a fourth consecutive term. Opposition figures have termed the vote as electoral robbery. Voter turnout also was low in the south and west of the Ivory Coast, where the opposition candidates are seen as wielding significant favour with the people. The election process saw widespread protests in the country, with supporters of former President Laurent Gbagbo and Tidjara Thiam both barred from the election, attempting to disrupt the vote. Well, that's a wrap today on the Africa Brief. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.